Hey everyone, it's you know the drill. It's Saturday, July 11th today. July 11th, it's 9 a.m. It's way earlier than normal, but still, Jesse, you look great. And so that excites me, even this early. We are super excited to have Karen Solomon, the founder, co founder, and president of Blue Help, bluehelp.org. I've been trying to get her on the show for years, or a week, but either way, we finally got her. Super excited about it. I've been a huge follower of Karen and her organization for the last couple years when I first found out about them. And then I had the pleasure of hearing her speak at a PERF symposium at NYPD for the law enforcement suicide prevention back in 2019. And as an instructor of someone who teaches suicide and police officer suicide, I rely heavily on the information that she's able to provide. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself more. But what I wanted to start this off with, other than a good morning and welcome, thank you for everyone that's continued to show up and watch us. I really appreciate it. But I titled this "Why Collecting Accurate Suicide Data is Important." Because as instructors and as police officers and as people who are trying to affect and implement change as Karen, unless we know how big or real the problem is, what's the point of doing anything about it? And so that's why I appreciate the fact, while I absolutely hate and it breaks my heart that we've had this uptick over the last several years, year over year, the numbers have been rising. And this year we are actually off to a great start where there was like a 30% reduction. But what I know is when I was going to have her on the show last week, last Saturday, I saw the numbers were at 87, and then this morning we're at 90. And so that tells me just in this week we've had 3 that I know of. And here's what we also know is that all the numbers reported of police suicide, they're conservative. They're very, I would say they're underreported. And I'll let her talk about that. And it's just, again, that's my opinion, because up until this point, a lot of what she gets is all voluntary admissions. It's families coming forward, it's police agencies being willing to share their information, but not a lot of departments are willing to come forward and say, we've had a suicide. They try and kind of brush it under the rug just because of fear or stigma, or like, I don't really want to, whatever their feelings are. So I want to get into that, but there's a lot to talk about. Super excited. Again, it's a dark topic. It's one of those things, but I think it's important that we bring it to light, because unless we're willing to have difficult conversations, nothing is going to change. And so, Karen, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, if you will.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. And sure, so my name is Karen Solomon. So for those of you who don't know me, I am the president and co-founder of Blue H.E.L.P. H.E.L.P is an acronym for Honor, Educate, Lead, and Prevent. And our primary mission is suicide awareness, prevention, and family support in the aftermath. So we started this, Jeff McGill, Steve Huff, they're 2 officers from Okaloosa, Florida. We never met each other. I knew their wives through an online support group. We got together, put our heads together, and to make a long story short, they claim that I stalked them online for years until they did my bidding. But I think that they stalked me because they wanted to hang out with me. So we formed this group, and we wanted to really bring awareness to law enforcement suicide because, like, as you said, people talked anecdotally about it for a long time, and groups have collected data, every 3 or 4 years. But unless you really know the scope of a problem and you can define it and measure it, you can't really intelligently do anything about it. So our mission was really to try to track these suicides year over year. So you mentioned that we are at 90. So here's some information for you. And I hate to start on a down note, but as you said, this is a depressing topic. So we started this year with 21 suicides in January, 18 in February. Then in March, we saw COVID-19. And in March, we went down to 11 suicides for that month. April and May, we saw 8. Now, we believe that there was a collective, sense of purpose. Officers felt loved. They had a mission, and they were able to put their personal issues aside and focus on what we needed from them as a society. So in May, we also saw 8. June, we upticked to 14. And now we are in July, and it is July 11th. Our number is now at 95. There have been 7 suicides since last Saturday, July 3rd. Well, that was the 4th, so Friday. So in 8 days, there's been 7 suicides. 2 of those were retired officers. So there's 5 active duty officers that took their lives in the last 7 days. Now, this, it could be a number of factors. It could be that now that collective feeling of hope and camaraderie is gone. So these are officers that may have um, taken their lives maybe last month, and it was just put off. We don't believe it's because of the riots and everything, the protests, the COVID-19 yet, because typically that takes more time to appear, but it could be. But the big problem right now is that 11 days into this month we've got 7 suicides, and that's pretty bad, pretty bad. So we really want people to be aware, and as you said, we know these because social media, we see it in the news, people report it to us, departments sometimes report it to us, families, friends. I talked to a widow last night. She lost her husband on Tuesday, and we found out because he was a veteran and a veterans group knew him, and they contacted us, and we contacted her. So it's a really, she didn't see any signs, and none. They had a plan. They were moving to a new state. He had a new job. Everything was great. His Their daughter was starting high school in a new state. In other instances, we see signs. So we can see addiction. We can see financial issues, domestic issues, job loss issues. But sometimes it just comes out of the blue, like this one. So we have a hard time providing people with the information that they want because we can't predict suicide. So right now, those 7 suicides, we're looking into them. We're talking to the families. We're seeing what we can do to help, but we're also trying to figure out what the heck's going on all of a sudden.
Well, that's a kind of a lot that you've addressed there.
Sorry,
when I start talking. That's excellent, though, because you are already diving into the things that we want to discuss, right? So I often tell people it's often unfair and unreliable to like use descriptive statistics and start making inferences. But in situations like this, we can at least start building patterns and start asking questions why. And I wanted to get into that with you, and it sounds like you're doing that very well. I do find it interesting that we started off with, an average about 20 a month starting this year, and then it just drops to half, right? And I think that your theories there are very sound, right? First responders had purpose again. We were needed. Our collective traits that make us who we are were kicked into gear. We were going to help people. We're going to be out there. We're going to do whatever we can to keep people safe, our community safe. And then, I find it interesting that when all this sentiment against police rises, so does suicide. Again, I don't want to establish a causality there because we can't, but I do love that you're at least using qualitative methods to find out what's going on in these people's lives. Now, what's even more interesting to me is this individual had no signs, right? So that makes you question even more how influential, how the country sees us and treats us, and our government and our leaders treat us affects those things. We often see that. I think a lot of people assume that officers, commit suicide because of the trauma we see in the field. I think I've seen some other research that suggests that we're really good at that, at dealing with that, but we pack it in such a way that it doesn't allow us to deal with everything else in our lives very well, and we like make bad choices, bad relationships. Have you seen that? What patterns have you seen?
Yes. So we have a professor right now who's working on the data. He was with Rutgers and he just went to a new university. So he's actually working all that detail out for the last few years. So we should have something published by the end of the year, some more information. But what I can tell you, based on what I know, because every suicide comes through me, and we get an alert, we see it. Typically, I try to talk to the family. There are others in our organization that talk to the families as well and see the information. So, but I definitely see every single one of them. So what I can tell you is, officers, okay, so let me start here with the post-traumatic stress. People have this misconception that, it's post-traumatic stress, it's the job, it's the job. It's definitely the job, but it's a different reason. It's the job because of the stigma and their inability to seek help. So that's the common thread, is that, because people have said to me, well, why law enforcement? Why not everybody? Everybody, is in jeopardy. Well, because nobody was doing it before us, and because the job is the common thread for these guys. So they do have financial issues. We see more officers take their lives after they've been served divorce papers. We see that's really common. We see financial issues, not as many as you would think. We definitely see a lot of alcohol issues. We see some domestic violence. We see some that were traumatized as children. So it's all the same stuff that anyone else, you or I or my next door neighbor, would experience. So they compartmentalize the job a little better, but that doesn't allow them to compartmentalize their life as well. And they also aren't able to seek the help because they're being so strong over here, and they aren't always as strong over here with their family as they need to be. So they have these same issues, but when you talk to every family, I would say, and I can't say this is a hard fact because I don't have it in front of me, but more than 50% of them felt they couldn't get help. The ones that did get help didn't get the help that they needed, or it wasn't appropriate for their situation. We've heard officers, actually, it was in February, an officer went away for 4 days, got help, came back. He felt like he needed a 30-day inpatient treatment program. He had 30 days left till he retired. So he had a choice. Do I finish out my 30 days and retire, or do I go for this inpatient treatment that I really, really need? Well, his department got involved, and he was so enraged that his department found out, and he felt like it would be a stigma and he was going to lose his benefits, lose his 30 days left to retirement. He shot himself on the spot when he found out that his department had gotten involved. So that stigma, that 30 days from retirement, and that emotion that's packed inside of you, there's all these little last minute things that happen in those few seconds before the suicide. There's the officer who received a text message saying that a guy that he had arrested multiple times had been let out on bail again, and that triggered his suicide. But it was exacerbated by other things that were going on. There was some dead children involved recently and things like that. So it's the inability to feel like you have any control over your career while you're suffering emotionally. Does that make sense?
I
Yeah, it
think
makes
Joe knows exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense, Karen, and so much of it hits close to home for me. Not just personally, but again, I've spent the last 11 years directly helping officers, and I've seen the full gamut, from the ones that are very open and willing, and they're coming forward saying, "Hey, these are my issues." Recently we've had one say, "Hey, I'm drinking 20 to 25 beers every day when I get home from work. No doubt I'm a functioning alcoholic. I need help." Right on. So we get them help. Everything's going well. Then we have the ones that aren't willing to see a problem yet. They show up, they get caught, or they get in trouble. And
Mhm.
then the help is kind of forced on them. And they've yet to accept the fact that it's a problem just because they got caught. Now all they're trying to do is go through the motions to actually,
Yep.
keep everything in check. And then we have the ones that, try to avoid at all costs saying anything. And this is one of the problems with it, is because also I've dealt with just 6 in my last 10 years on our department of officers that have killed themselves. And some of them I was closer with, some of them I helped directly, and some of them I didn't know were struggling at all. And so it's when we were at that perf symposium, I don't know if you remember, Karen, but one of the commissioners, someone got up and said, what we're seeing is all these suicides are because of relationships. And I was like, nah, that is not, that we can't just, that's a very myopic thought, to think that it's just officers are killing themselves because they're in bad relationships. I think we get in bad relationships oftentimes because we don't know how, just as you pointed out, and as Jesse pointed out, is because our life is kind of unstable, and we try so hard to keep a rigid kind of structure in our work life, because this is my issue with all of it. It's a cultural issue from the top to the bottom, of not fully embracing from the moment they become cadets, from the moment they start training. We don't do enough to address mental health. We don't do enough to prepare them to be resilient. We don't do enough to prepare officers to think about, hey, look, this is all fun and good times right now, that's going to challenge you. It's great. It's exciting. You're a part of a team. You're a part of this thing. But here's what you also need to know. Within a couple of years, you're going to be there's a chance you're going to be pretty checked out. You're going to become calloused. You're going to become desensitized to so many things that you never were supposed to see. You're going to just be emotionally kind of numb. You're going to have flat affect. You're going to struggle in your relationships. Let's really work hard now on the front end to start building those tools and build up those resilient capacities within you, so that way you can thrive and have better relationships and all these things. Because it's not just a relationship problem. It's not just an alcohol problem. It's not just a one thing. I think a lot of it can stem from the trauma and the job. And it's like, I just saw a report yesterday talking about the officers in Minneapolis that are now reporting PTSD, PTS from the protest. And you get it's so infuriating, because the country sees that and like, whatever, like no empathy, no, like, oh, they asked for that. And it's like, did they? I mean, just because those 4 officers on that one call did a terrible, terrible thing, did the officer that was forced to go like gear up and stand the front line and get things hurled at them and all, did they ask for that? No. And so it's frustrating when people are like, nah, I can't really give you any compassion or empathy because this is what you asked for. This is your fault or whatever. And it's like, man, I am glad that I haven't had to go and stand the front line on these violent protests or non-peaceful protests or all these different things. And so I imagine how that is contributing to the officer's mental health. And I also predict a pretty steep increase over the next several months as well, that things are not going to get better before they get worse. And that's really unfortunate.
So I want to address 2 things. So one, you talked about the culture. So just to talk to the culture as an example, I'm going to ask you, there are 3 things I'm going to ask you if you know about. Do you know about the Law Enforcement Suicide Data Collection Act? Just a yes or no.
Yes, because of you.
Okay. Do you know about the Cops Counseling Act bill?
No.
Do you know about the Public Safety Officers Benefit Act of 2020?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to briefly tell you what they are, and then you tell me why why our culture isn't talking about this and why this isn't public knowledge. The Law Enforcement Suicide Data Collection Act was passed on June 6th, the same day as the Police Officer Reform Act. It requires the FBI to start collecting suicide data similar to what they do for local law enforcement officers killed and assaulted. And it includes dispatch, it includes attempts, it includes all kinds of data points. Nobody's talking about it. The Police Safety Officer, Police Support Act, PSLB Act of 2020 was just introduced this week into the House by Senator Trone, and it requires the same PSOB benefits for officers who die by suicide and officers who are off duty for post-traumatic stress as it does for every other line of duty death and injury. So it includes them going forward for post-traumatic stress. Why isn't anybody talking about that? Why isn't the FOP or anybody else on top of this? Then the Cops Counseling Act was also introduced by Senator Quigley and Senators Cortez Mastro. They were the ones who just passed the Law Enforcement Suicide Data Collection Act, and that requires certain mental health and appropriations for officers who have mental health issues as a result of the jobs. Why isn't anybody? Why? Where are all the supporters? Where are all the organizations? Where is the news? You know.
I have a theory.
Go ahead, go for it, because I'd like to hear it.
And I could be wrong, but so when you said FOP, you're meaning Fraternal Order of Police, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, and this is just my opinion, I think unions right now, more than ever, are so intertwined in political messaging. They are more concerned with tarnishing the views of their enemies politically and kind of fighting for our image overall and highlighting, hey, this mayor did that or this bill passed over here. They're so consumed with this political battle on how we're being treated and what our future looks like and far as like pensions or firing practices or hiring practices, whatever. And they're missing the mark on this.
Yeah.
And it's super important because if you wanted to highlight anything, this would be it, especially if you were more interested in building morale. But I think I don't know why that is. Their job is to fight for us. I get it, and they're fighting for the profession and the future of it. But to your point, for us not to know about these things, for Joe and I not to know about these things, says quite a bit.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah,
just my
Karen,
theory on it. Yeah.
I saw the first one you mentioned, the bill that got passed. I saw you posted that through Blue Help, I believe. And so again, I frequently check in, and so I saw that you posted something like that on social media, and I was like, oh wow, look at this. And I told Jesse that's actually what sparked me to think like, oh damn, I need to get her on the show and talk about this. And so that was the catalyst moment of why I wanted to bring you on, was because I saw that and I was like, yeah, to your point, like, and I love your fire, Karen. It's like you're obviously right
Not
where you
everyone
belong.
does.
I'm sure. I'm sure. But no, I think it's super important, right? Because I think, again, it's like, you know, it's one of these weird things that we have to, it's like petting a porcupine. You know, it's like only talk about it when it's convenient to talk about it to the right person when they're ready to hear about it. And it's like, why does it have to be that way? We are inundated 24/7 with just nastiness on every media outlet, just slinging at the other side, just everything is divisive. Like, but the other side of that is, why are not, to your point, why are not law enforcement leaders coming forward screaming from the rooftops of like, hey, look, this is like a monumental moment in the history of our profession. We have incredible things coming forward. Why are we not more proud of this? And again, I think this is just opinion of mine, is much to the similarity that Jesse and I talk about in our business, that, hey, and when we kind of pivoted into the private sector, it's like, man, why is it getting hard to drum up business? Because in order for someone to hire us, it almost is that they have to accept that there's a problem, that they have something wrong in their outfit, that there's something wrong in their people, there's something wrong, like, maybe we're not doing things the best we can. And so it's like, you have to first be willing to address the fact that, like, maybe we're not doing this as well as we could. Maybe we actually don't have the best culture we could. Maybe we don't actually train on the appropriate things and prepare our men and women officers to actually do the reality of this job. And then if we could get to that place of accepting that, then it would be much easier to then support and announce these types of bills and these massive wins, I would call, for our profession. But we're not willing to do it because we would rather a lot of, and again, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I know a lot of leaders in law enforcement that are like mum, because it's like, no, that's not even a problem here. Because we gauge our success on the fact that we haven't had a suicide in the last 12 months on my agency. So we're doing everything good. And I hate that, because again, we need to look at it from a global scale, because what we also know from that symposium, Karen, is Dr. John Mann from Columbia said 10% conservative, 10% of every police agency in this country is suffering from depression. Most of those in silence, which is to that point of, there might not be signs, right? You can do a psychological autopsy or a suicide autopsy after the fact and peel back layers. But a lot of people work so hard to hide everything, that they're suffering, that they're struggling, and they do it in silence. And it's so sad to see, because then the family's left like, what the hell happened? I didn't see this anywhere. And so I really, really appreciate you bringing up those three main points. Thank you.
Yeah, and suicide's not predictive. So we can peel back as many layers as we want, and we can say this is the percent of office. I mean, this is the percent of officers that had drinking problems. But it doesn't. If my husband has a drinking problem, it doesn't mean he's going to take his life. So, and that's
Yep.
the tricky thing about suicide and about mental health and your brain and the way the brain works. So it's helpful to have this information, but you can't predict it. So and as far as those acts, and Amy Sue will post them for you in the comments. But I think, Jesse, what you said is true. And part of me, some days I'm very forgiving, and I say, well, they're working behind the scene. They being all the big law enforcement leaders around the country, they're working behind the scenes quietly, and they're doing stuff that I can't possibly do. But we have a pretty small audience, so to me, they have huge audiences, and I know they know about this stuff, so they should be garnering support through their channels, and their inability to do so, or whether it's through because they're focused on other things, or because they don't want to offend people, to me is a huge shortcoming, because we're working for law enforcement, people like me who are out here doing this, in addition to my part-time job, but all these other nonprofits, all these organizations that represent law enforcement around the country, we're working for them to make their lives better, and we should be engaging them in these things. And like you said, making their morale better, saying, "Hey, listen, we're working on this. Here's what's coming down the pike. Here's just what happened. We're going to help you guys." So. I mean, again, some days I'm more forgiving, because I think silent leadership, where I'm in your face kind of leadership, two different styles. But I don't know. I don't think it's forgivable that June 6th, this Suicide Data Collection Act came out and it was a blip on the screen, you know?
Yeah.
So, and then as far as, what we're doing, things have gotten a lot better over the last few years. So obviously these three acts are a huge part of that. So we've been doing this is we started January 1st, 2016. And since we've been doing this, obviously it's in the news. We get, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, everybody calls us, CNN, um, for our number. And that's fantastic. So it's in the news, it's in the forefront, and it's forcing change. And there are some departments, like you said, Joe, they're doing better. Their suicides have gone down. The LAPD has gone down. Programs are being put in place, wellness programs, but we're still not really good at it because everybody's reinventing the wheel. So right? No, I mean there's
Yeah.
wellness programs that are
Yeah.
working fantastic, and we should be sharing those. So, for instance, one of the things that I like to share, and I shared it at the Perf event, was the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. While they don't recognize suicide, they do have a wellness award every year, and people who have wellness programs in their departments submit, and they list the winners and the runners up on their website. And there's some amazing departments doing amazing things. And if you want a wellness program, you should be going to that website and going, hey, let's see who the winners were the last few years and what they're doing and how we can make it work at our department. We stink at that. We being the collective law enforcement community. We, being Blue Help, push people to that site, push people to these departments because people go, hey, how can I set up a wellness department? Can you help me? No, I can't, but here's who can. Here's a couple of departments that are doing great things. Go talk to them. And that's the kind of communication that's not getting out, and that's frustrating because with all this good stuff going on, we should be able to be reducing these suicides nationwide if we were working together, and we're not.
I think it's interesting too, real quick, Jesse, is,
Yeah.
as you continue your efforts, Karen, through Blue Help, I wonder if the numbers are catching up with the fact that there's a wider net being cast out. And then as these reports become quote unquote mandated, or the FBI is going to start collecting this data, because I've always wondered, like, how many were there, but when nobody was collecting these, or have the numbers actually gone up? And I know you started in January of 16. And so it showed those numbers and they have gone up each year. But I think as we continue to put more effort into gathering more accurate data, this is why it's important, because it actually is a bigger issue than we even know about. And then the other thing is, as far as wellness programs go, it's so interesting because I 100% agree with you, is we're so territorial in this profession. It's the type A that comes with it. It's like, no, even though they're doing it great and they have incredible results, I need to do it and put my name on it, and it's going to be my way, and blah, blah, blah. And we're such an ego-driven profession that it really gets in the way of us achieving our greatest capacity. And so we have something very simple that we did within our department, which is I've kind of forged it into our annual in-service training, because every 3 years we have to do a crisis intervention training refresher, an 8-hour refresher every few years. And so it just happened to be this year. I saw the number 228 last year, and I was like, we're not going to just teach the same CIT refresher that hasn't had any updates for the last, 10 years. Like, let me create a class about like self-care and building resiliency and all this. And it's just a 90-minute class. And I cannot tell you, Karen, I've taught that class now. Granted, COVID shut down training for like 3 months, which was terrible. But in the first 12 weeks where I did it every week, not one week went by that I didn't have someone come up after the class saying like, hey, thank you so much. Like, I need help right now. But here's what we know about officers is, in order for them to be willing to come forward, not only does it have to be the right timing, it has to be met with the right opportunity. And so the fact that like we are there as a mental health representative, a mental health unit, in that time, talking to them about the reality of this job, the reality, using personal story, connecting with them, kind of opening them up, breaking their walls down. And then you're just there at the end and they're like, uh-oh, I'm starting to feel something. Like, I don't know what to do with this. And so then they come up, and I've had several of them do that. One officer, 30 years, said, hey, Joe, I just want to thank you for what you just did. 30 years of my career, you just in this 90-minute class made sense of everything, of why I feel the way I feel. And I know I need to get help, but I have hope that when I retire now, I'm going to be okay. Like, profound things. And that's just a 90-minute class. So for the ones doing nothing, it's like, it's not that difficult to do something. I've already gotten over 15 officers just put into counseling services from that one class. So we have to just do something, right? Even if it's like, well, we're going to create this big thing, like it doesn't have to be something massive. It really can be that nuanced to where you just throw together a 90-minute PowerPoint, but get someone that knows what they're talking about, not just talking at people. But anyway, so it is quite simple to do something. Doing nothing shouldn't be an option.
My nephew's in the academy right now. He graduates July 31st, and he called me a few weeks ago, and he said, Auntie, I have to do a presentation. I want to do it on mental health. He only had 10 minutes. So I helped him out, gave him some information. He gave the presentation, and he said that after he called me yesterday, he said, Auntie, 3 other guys did it on mental health when they saw mine because they couldn't believe the information that you gave me. So that's a catalyst too. You know, you somebody hears it and they go, what? I mean, and it picks up. And these guys are coming, you know, they're new recruits, and this is going to be super important to them. So they do need to know. And then Jesse, you can talk. I'll let you talk, Jesse.
No, it's fine.
But you said about collecting the data, and I think you're right. So when we were at PERP, I spent some time with John Violante, who's the leader in the field, and he did say to me, you have to have 8 to 10 years of data before you know for sure. So we're well into our 5th year of data, so we'll be able to see, are we casting a wider net for sure? The first year we collected it, it took us 3 to 6 months to get our hands on these suicides. I mean, I talked to a widow yesterday whose husband died on Tuesday. So we're getting officers, they screenshot their computer screen to let us know they're at an active scene of a law enforcement suicide, because we need some kind of proof, right? We can't just, and they want us to know, but they can't tell us their name because, you know, they don't want to get in trouble. But so we're getting them while officers are on the scene. So we're getting them ridiculously faster than we used to. And we're getting them, like you said, a lot more. So it could be because of us, you know, being more diligent about this and people actually being willing to reveal it to us now. The stigma's gone. Not gone, but it's better.
Is that common that you get them that like unconventional way that some officer on scene just screenshots it, sends it to you? I was like, oh.
Sometimes.
No, I love that. I love it because again, like, would you get it otherwise? You know, like,
right, because we do. And I mean, it's not, and it was funny because when we went through this information with the professor from Rutgers, he said, well, how did you get this one? Because, you know, and I would say, well, this is how we got it. Or like Kathy Bustos, she's watching. I'd say, well, Kathy Bustos, she's part of the peer support couple. She called me and this is a friend of hers. So you have to have, you know, some of them people go, well, this guy, you know, I heard, and if we can't find information, we can't include it, right? So we have to have a lot more people are willing to come forward with the names now because they know that we don't give out the names. If anybody who's been watching us since we started, no names unless every family member gives us permission. And if ever a family member comes back and says, hey, I didn't know my mother did this, can you take it down? We take it down. We are not gonna, you know, it's a personal, private thing.
Right.
But we do get it that way. We get text messages. One of the deputy chiefs at one of the top 3 departments, well, Chicago, he's retired now. He would call me on my cell phone regularly and let me know every time a Chicago police officer died by suicide, and you couldn't find it anywhere, you know? Yeah. So it's crazy that he would call me personally because he met me at PERF as well and tell me every time there was a suicide, but you couldn't find it. And you know, so people are on the down low, so to speak, you know, hey, Karen, this is the guy's name, blah, 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 because it's a shady business, you know, suicide, you know, and it's too bad. It shouldn't be, you know, it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
Anyway, blah, blah. Go ahead, Jesse. What do you want to say?
That's what it was. Backtracking, right? You mentioned impulsivity. Well, you didn't mention it, but it was a factor in one of them passing. And I know Joe said that, you know, it's as simple, if you want to just do something, do it. But I also think it's important to have something comprehensive once you start, right? So have somebody that, you know, that's good that you have references. And I mean, we exist. And what I found interesting is how important, in your opinion, is to have leadership really understand the problem. Because you can have a program there set up, right? The officer's doing what he's doing. But whenever the person needs the help and needs everything afterwards, how important is leadership's understanding of this? And especially if leadership doesn't understand the impulsivity involved, right? This guy has 30 days left and then everyone's involved in his business, not really thinking about it. And you know, Joe mentioned our personality types, especially leaders. We want to like get really involved and take over everything and tell the person, this is what you're going to do. I order this, I'm going to put them here. How important is it that leadership fundamentally understand this problem?
It's ridiculously important. So, uh, I mean, so many things. So, number one, and I use this example now, and I'll use it again. I try to switch up the examples I use, but sometimes the stories are just too powerful to not use, even though I use it all the time. We have an officer in Texas who took his life. He had disappeared. He had some mental health issues. They found him. He was safe, good. Put him in, got some help. They mandated counseling for him, but his shift wouldn't allow him to go to counseling because of the shifts he was working. He couldn't get out of work to get counseling. Leadership did not help him adjust his shift so he can get counseling. Long story short, he disappears again. Leadership says, "Hey, he's just hiding. It's a domestic. He's mad at his wife. We're not bothering looking for him." He was dead in the police department in the police department parking lot in his own car. He was dead for 3 days before they found him because they didn't put out a bolo. Now, that leadership failed. And they also failed because they said they wouldn't give him the off duty honors he deserved because it was a suicide and they didn't want to glorify suicide failure. So, what leadership needs to do, there needs to be a blanket policy around the country. We have policies, protocol, procedures for line of duty. We have policies, protocol, procedures for off duty death. Those off duty death protocols should specify suicide is included because they deserve it just as much, unless it's a murder suicide or extenuating circumstances that we can identify. They should be included. There should be a policy across the United States that says, which is part of this cops counseling act, that offers officers assistance without penalization, and it has a guideline for the department on how to handle this. Because if an officer, they're so afraid that the department's going to find out, and if the department finds out, which it's really nobody's business if you're going for counseling, but if they find out, there should be something in place that protects those officers, and it should be ironclad. So that's part of our problem. The leadership has nothing to follow. They have no leader that's leading them into this protocol, policy, procedure of how to handle these kind of situations. So I am part of the National Consortium on Law Enforcement Suicide Prevention, which is funded by the Department of Justice. I'm co-chair of the Data Collection Act, but there's five different subcommittees, and the IACP is leading that up, and they are coming back with recommendations for Congress and everything like that, which is fantastic. So the IACP is leading on that, and that information is being passed down to their chiefs through their newsletters and their website and whatnot. But we don't have time to wait for Congress, and a lot of this stuff hinges on grants from the Department of Justice, or there's all. The reason I believe we've been so successful is because we just do our thing. We're not beholden to anybody. We don't wait for any money. We don't wait for any approval. We do our thing. And at some point, somebody needs to step up. It doesn't cost money to write a policy and distribute it. You don't need a grant from the Department of Justice. You don't need Congress's approval. And I think too many leaders are hooked on this whole, let's get some money, it's like you said before, we want our name on it. We're egotistical. Let's just do it. There's nothing preventing us from writing a policy that protects these officers. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's where leadership is failing. They're waiting for something, and I don't know what they're waiting for. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Karen. With for whatever reason, cops have the hardest time being put in positions that they don't know how to thrive in. And so anytime there's a new experience, it's like, I'm going to avoid that at all costs because I don't want to look silly because I am a chief of police. Like, I can't, what if I make a mistake? What if I have to humble myself and apologize? And I can't tell you how much the views and opinions of everything in the show are mine alone, and that of Jesse and myself and Solution Point Flats. But there's so much I want to say that I really probably shouldn't or can't because I'm not yet retired. And I've experienced this firsthand in other agencies we've worked for because we do our trainings around the country and we've helped other officers. But some of the things that you're saying, Karen, they fire me up, just like Loadmaster Mike says, it's infuriating because as officers who help other officers and who are willing to put themselves on the line to say, no, I'm going to go to bat for you. I'm going to advocate for you, because I've experienced this time and time again where it was met with resistance because for example, I'm not the right rank to make a recommendation, even though I've got a decade and a half or over a decade of experience of doing this. I'm not, because my rank isn't as high as someone else's rank. It's like, hey, you shouldn't be making this recommendation that he should come to a different shift for a couple weeks. And it's like, that makes zero sense to me. I've met with this guy for 2 days. I've spent hours with him and his family. I know exactly what he needs because he's communicating it to me, which is a huge first step. Like, shouldn't we support this? And then that officer's verbatim response was, Joe, we bust our ass every day for complete strangers for this department. We put our lives on the line. And the moment our life is on the line, the department turns their back on us. This is why officers kill themselves. Verbatim. I'll never forget it. And it broke my heart because it was like, you're absolutely right. Like, you're absolutely right. When officers take that risk to come forward, in some cases, again, there are some agencies that are doing a great job. Some departments are doing an incredible job supporting their officers. But then there's some that are still stuck and they're just unsure of how to do it. And they're trying to navigate all of the personalities and the egos and the fact that there isn't a policy. So it's like, well, there's no rule on this, so I don't know what to do. And thinking on my toes makes me really uncomfortable. So let's just avoid it.
Yeah. And I don't want to feel like I'm being accusatory, because a lot of people call my passion anger, and, oh, you're an angry woman and you hate everybody and you're accusing them, and I got that a lot after the perf event. But it's just a fact.
Really?
Yeah, it's just a fact. You know what I mean? And there are a lot of agencies doing a lot of great things. You're absolutely right. But I'm focused on the ones that aren't doing the right thing. And we need to get them all up to speed. And the number that lag behind are too many, and those are the ones that were having the suicides in those departments. The LAPD stepped up; their suicides went way down. The NYPD, their suicides have gone down. We don't know how that's going to pan out for the rest of the year, but after that year where they had that huge uptick, it's gone down. We see that programs are working. So we can't continue to lag. We can't continue to let leaders slide or be afraid. If I was afraid of change comes from people being fearless and people not caring what other people think about them if they're doing the right thing. I mean, there's a difference between doing the wrong thing and not caring and doing the right thing. But if you as a chief are doing the right thing, you're going to be more respected, your department's going to be healthier, and you're going to be the catalyst for the next change. And that's the courage that those leaders need to feel in their hearts, And I think that's part of the reason we started telling these stories. And I could sit here and give you 200 examples of suicides that could have been prevented and what happened and how they were treated and names and dates. And the reason I do that is because if you don't feel it in your heart, it's not going to count to you. It's not 95 officers that killed themselves this year. It's fathers, brothers, sisters, mothers. It's black, it's white, it's everybody. It's the guy with the twins. It's the guy with the 14-year-old and 18-year-old. It's God. I mean, you know how I get on myself all wound up. But until they actually feel it and do it from their heart, they can't lead the way we need them to lead right now on this mental health issue.
Unfortunately, it's highly politically unpopular to do anything positive for law enforcement right now. Highly politically so, unfortunately. But I agree with you, and I'm sorry that people see you coming off as maybe too passionate or angry.
Karen.
No,
I'm used to it. My husband thinks I'm angry too.
I wanted to talk about.
No, go ahead, Jesse. Sorry.
I wanted to talk about the mission of your organization, right? Because I think everyone gets caught up in data. But I'm going to read this, right? So, reduce mental health stigma through education, acknowledge officers who have been lost to suicide. I think that's huge because no one else does. Advocate for PTSD benefits for officers, searching for healing, and then bringing mental health and suicide awareness. So that's a pretty comprehensive thing you do. And I know everyone just gets caught up in the data because you're providing numbers that no one else can. I think it's excellent that, these major news organizations are reaching out to you for that information, which is good, as they should. And I just wanted to highlight that you do all of those things, and that I can sense it because of how it comes out of you when you're talking about these things. So I just want to thank you for what you do, and that's a very holistic way to run an organization.
Yeah. Karen, let me jump
you're welcome.
in.
So and I mean,
just because I want you to answer that, but I want you to first tell me, because I'm curious, how did you get where you are? Like, why are you doing what you're doing right now?
Being angry. um, so it came out of anger, to be honest. That's how it started. So Ferguson, Missouri, my husband's a police officer. We have two young kids. Well, they're 18 and 15 now. But at the time of Ferguson, my son came home from school and he was really upset. He said, "Mom, somebody at school said pop beats people up for no reason." I'm like, "What?" And of course, they didn't specify my husband, but they were talking about police, and he was pretty upset. And at the time, his best friend, Ife, was black. He's from Ghana, best friends forever. And I overheard him saying to Ife, "If you don't feel like you want to come over," he's not feel like, he said, "If you don't want to come over anymore, I understand." And Ife said, "Why wouldn't I?" And my son said, "Because my dad's a police officer." And I was like, "Oh." And I just, I mean, you like that moment, I can't even tell you how I felt. So I talked to both kids and whatever, and I just got really mad. And I wrote a book called Hearts Beneath the Badge. It was just kind of a short book, little short stories of officers around the country who do good things for people, just for people to see them as a human being, and that they're real people. And each chapter starts with a photo of them, their name, how many years of service, and their favorite ice cream. And I chose their favorite ice cream just kind of like a human thing, because most people like ice cream, right? So you can relate. Then that evolved into a book called The Price They Pay, about different officers around the country. Jeff McGill, one of my co-founders, co-wrote it with me. He's super smart. He would write the beginning chapter about like the statistics, the information, compassion, fatigue, whatever it was we were talking about in that chapter. And I would tell the story of an officer who suffered that, whether it was 6 shots to the chest, whether it was an officer who watched a child burn alive, whatever it was, female officers and what they suffer on the job. And that evolved into us realizing that officers didn't know where to get help. Officers were dying by suicide. Families weren't getting assistance. So we just said, heck it, let's just do it. We just created this organization. We did it. And because it was a gap that no one else was filling, it was easy to fill. So one of the things that people don't notice about us, and I think it's because we do that pretty quietly. It's we don't walk around with big posters, look what we're doing. The statistics we do because everybody asks us, but what we do is after a suicide, we send care packages to the family and the departments. We send them information. During COVID-19, we did a coffee run. We sent coffee and mental health information to 658 departments around the country. Motorola Solutions Foundation and Gary Sinise Foundation funded that for us.
Wow.
We also, in addition to that, we sent another 500 departments just mental health posters and brochures. We held a Police Week dinner last year at Police Week to honor the service of the officers we lost to suicide. We had one scheduled for this year, but we couldn't because of COVID, so we put it off. Last year, we decided, what the heck, let's just declare September 26th Suicide Awareness Day for law enforcement. So we made it Law Enforcement Suicide Awareness Day. We had walks around the country. We're doing it again this year. We have a super special surprise for this year that I can't wait to announce, but I can't yet. So we had funding from Motorola for retreats, similar to what they have for line of duty, but we couldn't do it this year because of COVID. So we're doing some virtual stuff. So we do a lot of stuff behind the scenes for the families that we just don't talk about, because it's, I don't know, it just feels self-serving. That's not our thing. We just go do our thing. You know what I mean? I don't know. We just want to help the families. So we kind of just, talk to the families, help them out, do what we can, find out what we can, try to get them together. We modeled ourselves after Officer Dale Memorial Page and concerns of police survivors, because neither one of them were addressing suicide. So you can put your officer on our honor wall if you're ready. And if the entire family agrees, we'll put their name and face up. We will, help you out. We've helped with funeral expenses. We've helped with co-pays for the kids when they've needed help after an officer suicide. We spent, I think, $7,000 on Christmas gifts this year for families who couldn't afford them because, financially, these families lose an officer to suicide. They have nothing. They don't have benefits. So we just kind of, whatever they need, we just try to do it. That's pretty simple. I don't know.
It's awesome. No, and I can tell you're passionate, Karen. You want to know how? Because you talk super fast. And I learned this through therapy with my wife, who speaks very, very fast. And and I'm like, hey, relax a bit. She's like, I'm passionate about this. And so it's like, brrr. And so you and my wife talk the same cadence. And so I know
take a deep breath in. and then take off.
Yeah. You know what's funny is when people present with me, they hate it because they're like, "Do you want to practice?" I'm like, "Practice what? I'm just going to talk." And then they go, "No, you're supposed to have a script." I'm like, "What script? I just go talk." Like, I don't, no. How do you know you're going to fit in the time limit? I'm like, "I'll be fine." So I don't, people hate presenting with me because I'm so bad. But I just want to say, yeah, Javier Bustos, who's part of the peer support couple, amazing stuff. Don't hug me. I hate hugs. He's right. I hate to be touched. I hate hugs. It's a ugh. But anyway, he was writing when we were talking about the police chiefs about placating protesters. Yeah, they don't recognize the cries from officers and their families that are suffering. And back to your 150 in Minneapolis, that's tremendous. When you think about what's going on in these officers' minds. And when I read that yesterday, I'm not going to lie, this wears on us. It's hard. It's frustrating. We sometimes don't get the support that we feel like we want people to give them. So you kind of want to throw in the towel and go, screw it. No one cares. Why should I? But you don't, because it's, not the right thing to do. And every once in a while, something triggers you to just keep moving. And when I saw that article yesterday, when officers were keeping one bullet in their gun in case they were getting beaten to death, I was like, oh my God, what are we doing here? And then you just keep pushing forward for that. So if we as regular people are pushing forward for them, they should be hearing the cries from the officers and families who are suffering, to use Javier's words, the chiefs, the leadership. We need to be better, and being better doesn't mean more patches, more I don't know, more news stories. It means really focusing on the things that are going to change the culture and that are going to make things safer, not only for police, but for their families and for their mental health. So I don't know. I talk too much. Yeah. Sorry.
No,
I'm out of words right now. So take your turns.
I really think that this subject is so entangled and nuanced that we're going to have you on again, probably, to talk about other things, because I don't even think we have really dived into culture. There's a lot of things that we haven't dived into or got into. It's sad that your organization has to exist, but I'm glad it does. And you were mentioning, right? I mean, stigma is like the underlying problem all over the place. The fact that you have to have a separate place to honor officers that have taken their life, it is because of stigma. The fact that you're having these data collection issues is because of stigma. The fact that legislation's passing and no one knows, stigma. I mean, the underlying root is stigma, and I think we all have to do better to break that. And I think you've done tremendous things. Thanks, your husband, to your service, and thanks for everything you do in your organization. We often close the show this way, and I'm going to allow you to do so also. And
are we going to sing?
Joe's going to rap while you do a chorus, right? Okay. And then I'm going to bust out one of the guitars. No.
Excellent.
It's something slightly more spontaneous. We ask you, or the person that's on, to kind of leave us with the final thought. Something that's on your heart, something that you want to say, something that you want to, give out. And we like to put people on the spot, so I'm going to do that now. If there's anything that you want to our audience to hear, now's your chance. So please.
God, I hate that. I think I think really, let's just go back to what I said earlier. You need to find it in yourself to have some courage. Find something that's super important to you. And it might not necessarily be law enforcement suicide, but find something that touches you, that when you see it, it makes you go, it makes you feel something, and find a way to change that. So if all of you here feel that way when you see something about law enforcement suicide or the protest or whatever, you go, oh, that means you feel it, and your passion is going to make a change. And I think that's what you need to do. I think you need to, every time you have that feeling, that tingle in your chest when you read or see something, do something, no matter how small, to make it better, because that's the only way collectively we're going to change. How's that?
That's awesome. I like that.
I'm a superstar. Yeah.
I can see why someone who isn't the best presenter wouldn't want to present with you. But someone who's a talent presenter, I think you would make a good team at any time. I think you and Joe could work the room really well. You should consider that, right? In the future, one of your engagements. Thank you for being on. Really appreciate it. I know that we talk about a myriad of issues here on the show, but I think, well, I know that this is the most important topic that we discuss. We go around the country and we teach classes, and we end up going in there because someone wants us to teach people how to speak better to humans, how to help law enforcement see humans and others, and communicate better. But one of the profound things that we do when we do this is we kind of bring this topic to the forefront. We remind them that mental health doesn't just affect everyone, it affects law enforcement especially. We train for the worst day possible. We practice our high-speed pursuits. We practice our body armor drills, drawing from the holster. We go jiu-jitsu class. We lift weights. We do CrossFit. We do all the things. But very rarely do we focus on our emotional self and mental self. And when we talk about this in these classes, the light bulb goes on. And it's incredible how everywhere we go, there's at least one person that thanks us and they get help because of it. There's a lot more to be done is what I'm saying. So if you're struggling through anything, there's organizations that can help. We're here, and I appreciate you listening and watching, subscribing, liking, and sharing, because we're just going to push that message forward as much as we can. Joe.
Thank you, Karen. It's been an incredible show. Jesse, your closing just made me feel something. That thing that Karen was talking about, I just felt it, because I know that this is our passion, to be sure. And, you know, there's, I've seen, I think it's on Blue H.E.L.P's website as well, or in social media, but there's this hashtag going around of "I will listen."
Yes, that's our campaign. Yep.
Yes. And so while I 100% believe in the hashtag "I will listen" campaign, we have to understand that in order to listen, someone has to be willing to speak up. And so I think equally important is hashtag "I will say something," especially as a law enforcement officer or a first responder. We have to be willing to speak for ourselves. We have to be willing to say when we're struggling. We have to be willing to come out and say, today is a bad day. I'm not safe going to work. Something is going on in my life. Something's going on in my head. I need a timeout. And so in order for someone to listen, we have to have someone that's willing to speak. And so I would ask that you join me and the many others that are willing to stand up for their own mental health, who are not afraid to say, I go to therapy every single month and I love it. And that we are willing to prioritize our own mental health for our own, stability and wellness. And then finally, I love quotes. Everyone knows me that knows I love quotes, and I usually go on the stoicism side, but we've heard many acronyms of the word fear, right? False evidence appearing real, all these different ones. But we talked a lot today about leadership. And I think when we talk specifically about fear in leadership, there's two things to think about. One is you can forget everything and run. That's a fearful leader. Just forget everything and just run away from it, avoid it. Or you can face everything and rise. And I think we need leaders right now that are willing to stand in the face of fear and face everything and rise. That's everything that's going on with COVID, everything that's going on with the protest, everything that's going on with the civil unrest, everything that's going on with the law enforcement officers' mental health that hasn't changed, that has only progressively gotten worse as we focus more attention onto it. We should be willing to face everything and rise above, which means be a leader. Stand up and say, hey, I don't know how to do this, but I want to do something because it's important to me, because I love the men and women that serve alongside of me and next to me, and I want to prioritize their mental health and wellness. And so while I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to go to the people who do, and I'm willing to get help, and I'm willing to publicly stand up and say enough is enough, because this is important to me. Karen, thank you.
Again. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You're awesome.
Yeah. Jesse's great seeing you. All right, everyone.
Likewise,
until next time, have a great weekend.
Great hair, Jesse. Jesse, great hair.
It needs to be cut, but thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yep.